Okay, guys, welcome back. Part two. Move a little faster this time. All right, ideologies. A big part of understanding World War II is trying to understand these belief systems. We may have talked about this before, but this is a very useful sort of breakdown. And this is a traditional understanding of the comparisons here. You could go to college and read a lot of books that kind of break this apart and get much more in depth and have different views on this. But this is just general understanding. So communism is typically considered a far left system of belief ideology, with one of its core understandings theoretically is that everyone should be treated equal. This is kind of the abolishment of any sort of social classes. On the far right, one would typically define fascism as an example of a far right movement. This is basically an ideology that's committed to the belief that there's inherent inequality between groups of people. Essentially, you have those who are superior and those who are inferior. This is weird because, and on one hand, right, because of this core difference, right, between the ideologies as a fundamental belief, they view each other as opposites, right? You can hear many, many speeches from Mussolini and Hitler basically saying communism is the great evil that's out to destroy everything that their people believe and support and desire to maintain. And they're the great enemy, right? The communists. Likewise, you can go back and see how Stalin had been warning Western powers of the dangers of fascism, especially when we discussed in the previous unit the Popular Front strategy to try to get Western support in defending Spain during the Civil War. But the weird thing about all this is the sort of similarities in the two systems in practice, right? So one of the things we see with both is that there is often a cult of personality in which the parties, right, that form the organizations around these ideologies, when in power, tend to really support the leader, right, the dictator. In the Soviet Union, it was Lenin, right, leading the Bolshevik Revolution, and eventually the power struggle once he died was won by Stalin. And Stalin is one of the greatest examples of a dictator that was so widely feared that no one dared oppose him after the 1930s, especially when he just seemed to wipe out everyone. In the fascist nations of Italy and Germany, again, those two dictators where the state sort of revolved entirely around them was Mussolini and Hitler. Hitler to a greater degree than Mussolini. Conspiracies. Another very effective way to garner control as a dictator, right? To facilitate public support of these extreme measures and this restriction of liberty, personal liberty, is this constant hammering of conspiracies. There's always a secret group out that's the real enemy that everything needs to be focused upon, diverting any sort of criticism from the people who are actually in power, right? So conspiracies, we know today, right, are still very popular, but used to great effectiveness by dictators, whether fascist or communist. Terror. Conspiracies help with that, right? To always be afraid of the other or the secret cabal or group, right, out to control everything. Another form of terror is simply secret police, right? Arresting anyone who opposes you. In the Soviet Union, we have the Gulag system. In fascist countries, especially in Germany, you have the concentration camp system. As well as secret police, the NKVD in the Soviet Union under Stalin, later the KGB, which you've heard of, and in fascist powers like Germany, you have the Gestapo, right? Secret police that encourage people to report on each other, that tap telephone lines, that actually conduct torture of people they've arrested, and to instill a sense of terror and fear to not challenge the system, right? And all of this leads to this thing known as totalitarianism. Governments in total control of your daily lives. Where you can go, what you can buy, what you can say, who you can be with, right, and so on. We are not truly used to this in the United States, largely because our republic is built on principles, right, totally opposed to this sort of thing. But this is essentially the height of power for these sorts of systems, and we see clear examples of that in the 30s. Again, totalitarianism, total control, total dictatorships, right, through these means. All right, so first dictator here, if you couldn't tell, Benito Mussolini. One of his sort of hallmarks, obviously, was the military dress, right? But he was very theatrical. And by espousing Italian nationalism and return to greatness, he wanted to make Italy a new Rome, essentially dominate the whole Mediterranean again. Jutting his chin, boasting, his puffing his chest out, and so forth. He garnered a lot of support. This is Emperor Hirohito, the Emperor of Japan, on his famous white horse, reviewing military formation, military parade. Emperor Hirohito is special in the sense that a lot of Japanese people worshipped him. Many had not heard his voice, and many believed that if the emperor supported something that the government called for, whether it was even a military dictatorship at that point, then it must be fine. And for the Japanese people, many of them took very seriously oaths of service and loyalty and honor in name of the emperor. And that's going to prolong the war for the United States in the Pacific, right? This commitment to these ideals that were so culturally instilled in the Japanese people for so long. And it's not really until the emperor convinces his government it's time to surrender by August of 45 that the war will finally come to an end for the United States. And this is Adolf Hitler. This is him reviewing sort of the first big group of Nazi supporters, the SA, the brown shirts. And this is with the infamous Sieg Heil salute, as you can see here, and the Nazi swastika on the top right. An adaptation of the Roman Wheel of Progress, and there's a whole lot of theories about the sort of insignia of the Nazi Party. What was interesting is that if you go back, the Nazis were seen as a far-right movement, grassroots, great appeal to sort of conservative Germans, many of whom were probably not highly educated. A rabble of sorts that promoted sort of aggression and violence, and that would never one day, be a serious threat to power. And sadly, those critics were wrong. As you can see here, this is a photograph of Hitler, basically assuming total power. This is basically the German Congress, the Reichstag. And after it was burned down in early 1933, Hitler and the Nazi Party basically manipulated the crisis to basically call for an emergency vote and a bill called the Enabling Act to give him dictatorial powers to deal with this crisis. The communists were trying to overthrow Germany. There's a lot of views on that moment, but this is the aftermath, the rebuilding the Reichstag and clear Nazi dominance, and Hitler would never give back those emergency dictatorial powers. And one effort at a time, right, the Nazi Party secures more and more power over the German government and its people. Okay. One big thing about fascism, especially in Germany, is the commitment to propaganda, number one, and number two, messaging. One big thing that the Nazi Party used to generate popularity with German voters and the public was the sense that Germany had been wronged in World War I. And this is an example of that. Germany had not lost. According to the Nazis, right, that they were stabbed in the back. And this is again tying into that sort of use of conspiracy. This is a very alluring message that the German people working hard at home, the millions of Germans who had served, many of whom had got hurt or died in World War I, were not to blame for this loss and the embarrassment of the Treaty of Versailles. It was sort of darker elements at home that were trying to bring Germany down, right? That ultimately surrendered. And if you can see, the color of the enemy, right, is red, and so that implies communism. These are some more Nazi propaganda posters during this period. And as you can see here, there's a general association of communism being dangerous. On the right, you can see the communist spider trying to, bent on global domination. And on the left, you can see basically death, right? Basically telling you what's waiting for you if the communists take over. This is a more sophisticated propaganda of the German state. So Hitler actually had a propaganda minister, right? His name was Goebbels. What should stand out to you is a couple of things. Number one, bold contrast, right? So one thing you see is three main colors used: red, white, and black. Just happens to coincide nicely with the fact that that's actually the colors of the Nazi Party flag, right? On the left, you can see a Nazi propaganda poster. It's pretty much saying German work, German products, are basically better than anything foreign made. And so again, one of Hitler's appeals, even for people who didn't love the Nazis, right, was that he was good for the nation of Germany. He was going to promote German economic recovery and improvement to their lives, right, material standard of living, and so on, promoting, again, German products by German, essentially. On the right, you see a propaganda poster basically saying the Nazi Party are literally going to be the ones who are going to actually destroy the chains of Versailles. Again, not only was Germany blamed for all of World War I in the Treaty of Versailles, but they were also punished. They were hit with reparations, so they owed money which they didn't have. And so another form of reparations was them essentially losing territory. German land was surrendered to France in the West, and therefore losing resources. And so that was said to be basically unforgivable. And the Nazis said they would reverse it. Another punishment laid on the Germans was that they couldn't have a large military. They had to demilitarize. And again, the Nazis were definitely committed to ending that as well. So this was actually quite popular in Germany, even for people who were not Nazis to their core. They would often agree, right, with this view on the Treaty of Versailles. And it ultimately leads all to this, right? This is basically should be a chilling thing. Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. One people, one Reich, right? One empire, one leader, one Führer. And so everything revolved around Adolf Hitler. After seizing power, following becoming chancellor, everyone has to obey and support the beliefs and words and policies of Adolf Hitler. This becomes a dictatorship. And a lot of Germans may be uncomfortable with it at first, but then ultimately are powerless to stop it. And some of them actually think of it as a good thing because of the improvement following the sort of struggles after World War I and the miseries of the Great Depression before he assumes power. Okay, back to the United States. In the United States, diplomacy is a bit limited. The Reciprocal Trade Agreement Act in the United States was basically FDR's attempt to kind of undo the damage of the Hawley Smoot tariff, which had, again, been started under Hoover's administration. We need to restore global trade, right, if we're going to promote economic recovery and restore just trade in general. And so when FDR comes in, there's agreements made between us and our trading partners, especially in Latin America. If we're going to lower tariffs on your goods, you have to promise to do the same for ours, right? And this actually does help. Is a very important measure in restoring, trade for the United States. Another thing FDR approves is recognition of the Soviet Union in the 1930s. He's the first American president to ever do that. And the big reason for this is not because FDR is a communist, like what some critics would claim, but the fact that it's a nation, it's been a nation for over a decade, and it's a potential large trade partner, which is something that is important for the United States and our recovery. The good neighbor policy is interesting in that FDR actually wants to kind of smooth things over, make up for years of bad relations, the legacies of Yankee imperialism from the United States in Latin America. So in 1933, we have the Inter-American Conference, which is basically America promising to not intervene in the affairs of Latin American countries. And this is clearly a step back from the Roosevelt corollary, right? What Cousin Teddy had pushed for as president. That doesn't mean that we're not tied economically, right? So if we're going to say, hey, we're not going to intervene in your countries like we've been doing for many years, there is a sense that you need to kind of give us something in return, right? So kind of open up your economies more to American trade and commerce and things like that. Okay, in the United States, we have the rise of isolationism. All right, so I'm going to end part 2 here and pick up with isolationism in part 3.